Hello and greetings. Welcome to the first Fireside Chat XREvolve Summit 2025. Christopher, thank you for such an extraordinary panel, and I believe this is gonna take it a notch higher. So my name is Lingi Tao. I'm here in Nairobi, Kenya, and with me I have the one and only Thomas. And before we even get into the matter of what brought us today. Thomas, I'd like you to tell us who you are and why you're here.
Okay, why I'm here is easy. I was invited by Christopher, and who I am, I've been creating basically digital productions since almost 30 years, roughly 10 years web development, 10 years games, and 10 years XR, roughly speaking, and always try to innovate in all of those different technologies and media that we're constantly evolving, of course, during this time.
Wow, excellent. Audience, we're going to be talking about producing XR experiences in the AI frontier. Thomas, you've mentioned decades and decades of experience, and with me, I carry a baggage of curiosity. What does it really mean to produce XR experiences in the AI frontier for you?
Maybe I start with telling a little bit of a story that goes way back. In 1997, we tried to create a website, a community website. We called it Just for Fun City. It was so we already had VRML. If anyone of the audience remembers, that was a 3D HTML basically, where you can create 3D assets. And we also wanted to include AI, and we played around with this chatbot, IRC chat. We wanted to make it live and really interactive, what we created. But we soon realized that the technology just wasn't there in terms of the 3D visualization. So we reverted back to HTML4 and still created a community page to connect online, have classifieds and stuff like that. And also had this live chatbot, which of course couldn't say much besides, responding to your questions in very trivial ways and tell you about the weather tomorrow and stuff like that. But I'm telling the story to illustrate that the same kind of terms, the same kind of discussions were already around 30 years ago. And we
Mhm.
already had AI, we already had VR, we all already had AR. And sometimes it's easy to lose track of the real progress versus the imagination that we have, right? To make something work in a production and in a real product is often a very different challenge to discussing at a very high level. Fast forward 20 years, 25 years later, in 2021, we started creating, for example, again, an AI bot that was in a VR environment, and it presented you a car, and you could talk with it while it presented you a car. Um, and that was pretty cool. We tried to give it like spatial awareness to understand where's the trunk, where does it have to point to. But this is still, even now 4 years later, it's on a pretty much experimental level. It's not productized. It's not that it just works like that, and even less though if we just have AI created.
Mm, wonderful. I love where you're going with this and taking us to where we were from and where we are right now. Within that time or period of time that you have had all these incredible experiences, I just want to find out, like, what are the human factors that have shaped where we are right now? And what is your current approach to XR as we're speaking?
Yeah, that's a great question because especially in the context, and we heard the roundtable discussion before our conversation, um, it's about what is the human doing in this tech human relationship, how is the human involved on the one side as a user but also as a creator. And I think AI is already ready to talk with you. AI is already ready to tell stories, but in the end, because there were a lot of mention about storytelling, I think AI is pretty good at storytelling. but it's in the
Mhm.
end it's about the human connection, right? The You want
Yeah.
to relate to the creators of something. It's always been the case in art as well. You want to relate to a real human experience rather than tech outputting generic stuff, right? So
Yeah.
that's why I'm saying it's always about storytelling, of course, but the
Mhm.
storytelling is not the defining element if you want to make this experience matter, if you want to make it
Yeah.
meaningful. The story has to relate to something, and most of, most of the time, real life. But real life, in this sense, of course, can be online life. It can be virtual life. We see all
Mhm.
this happening with the user-created content platforms in games like Roblox and so on. Again, a platform that has been in the creation for 20 years now, I think almost. Um, and we're still not at the point that user created content is just easily created, right? It
Mhm.
still takes expertise. We had so many projects in this domain, like Project Spark or others, where game creators try to give more power to the even Super Mario to the players, but
Mhm.
it was always not the same as if
Yeah.
um, trained game designers created it, because the trained game designer learns about this interactive process. It
Mhm.
especially learns to understand the psychology. And I
Yeah.
think that's what we have to go back to if we want to create better experiences. And that's kind of where I'm coming from when I'm creating games or when I'm creating XR.
Mhm.
What's the human connection? What's the psychology? Is because
Yeah.
that's something that doesn't change as rapidly. The human psychology doesn't evolve as quickly as the technology. So if we kind of try to think from there, try to connect it from there. It's a
Mm.
kind of safer space for us to
Yeah.
not be taken over from technology.
Yeah, definitely. But I just want to go deeper on something that you mentioned earlier on. You said storytelling is not only the defining thing, it has to be relatable. I'm looking at a generation right here that is more used to machines, and they're more used to even communicating online. Do we have relatable stories that AI can tell them? I think they're gonna relate more to AI than human stories. What do we do in such a case,
Hmm.
in your own perspective?
I think AI created stories can be very relatable. The
Yes.
What I said is like the human connection and the
Mhm.
relation to something real matters. On top of that, you can tell a nice story and
Yes.
in some sense a relatable story, which is not which is fiction, and that's also great. Like we have so many fictional stories, we have blockbusters, and so it always
Mhm.
depends on what you're trying to create. And I think in that sense, AI will be much better in creating the next blockbuster
Yeah.
compared to, in terms of storytelling, compared to like an author uh,
Mhm.
um, unique story, right? Because
Mhm.
the kind of storytelling that's ingrained in us and that has been repeated over and over is what the AI will also understand best.
Yes, I couldn't want another better answer than what you just said. I truly believe that is right. Let us shift gears to ethical responsibility, because this is one of the biggest concerns, and it will always remain as the biggest concern. How do you balance immersive design with ethical responsibility in an AI enhanced XR world?
Hmm. Well, first of all, I think we have to think about this access to XR and AI,
Mhm.
both as a privilege and a sacrifice. Um, Privilege
Mm,
in terms of not everyone having access to this, even though we talk about
yes.
democratization. Not everyone has access. It costs massive resources to enable some few people to have access to this. So there's also a responsibility that um, just to make it happen, it doesn't necessarily mean democratization. Yes, it is
Mhm.
easier to create something, but you still need access. And then also
Yes.
in terms of sacrifice, because as soon as we're giving that autonomy and agency to AI, we're kind of losing the responsibility, and we also give away the thinking and the speaking. I mean, I've
Mm.
seen like parents' chats for school where
Yeah.
basically legal AI bots are talking about an issue rather than the people are trying to understand each other, right? So,
Yes.
um, so if we're losing that agency, that will be more harmful than trying to reflect on the use. And it's so easy to give up that reflective perspective very quickly because
Mm-hmm.
something comes out of it, we just use
Yeah.
it, but we
Mm-hmm.
haven't thought it through, right? When we
Mm-hmm.
create something ourselves, we're thinking through it, we're having a spark of imagination, and we're kind of
Yeah.
deducting from there. That's not what happens with AI. You're presented with a result, and then you have to bring up a lot of effort after the fact to relate and to understand something the AI came up with, which is much
Mm-hmm.
harder. Same goes for coding. Like when
Mm-hmm.
code is created by AI,
Yeah.
you haven't thought through it, so fixing bugs and so on will be much harder. And there's always um, y- uh, an element of abstraction penalty, right? When
Mm-hmm.
also with a higher programming language already, if you're using that, you don't fully understand what the computer is doing. Now,
Yeah.
AI gives us a new, and that's a great thing. It gives us a new way to talk to computers and a new way for the computer to understand human context. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
great thing because it enables us to speak to the machine in a more natural way. Um, but at the same time, as designers, we have to take the responsibility and try to make an impact, right? So
Yeah.
usually that's one of the big problems. The designer doesn't sit at the table where the decision is being made, right? So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, you have to, as a designer, and that's more of an organizational and a social
Yeah.
aspect, right? You have to take your agency by heart and say, I can make a difference. And
Mm-hmm.
in real life productions, this might only be a very small nudge to a certain direction because we all know it's about budgets, timelines,
Mm-hmm.
getting
Yeah.
something done. But a small nudge into a more responsible or more
Mm-hmm.
accessible
Yeah.
product can make a huge difference in the end.
Yes, I totally agree with that on the aspect of taking responsibility and every designer looking at it with the perspective, I have a role to play. And you also mentioned about accessibility. There's so many people who can't access. I live in a continent that is in Africa where some people even don't have the basic access to a computer, right? But we can go a long distance with that topic, but let me just shift to something else. What frameworks do you use to assess the psychological impact of XR content? Yes, I love this one.
It's an awfully specific question, but I think, and there are common tools like SAS to get us channel feedback about, and you have like a Likert scale with 5 answers. But already applying something like SAS is making it a little bit more scientific, right? So because you're asking a question one way and the negative way as well, and then you get more of an answer. But it always depends on what you want to make out of it, right? So when we created for car manufacturers, when we created XR experiences, we also did we also did tests and questionnaires to enable us to communicate to the client that this is a success in terms of return of investment, but also in terms of um, you know for example, filling out a questionnaire right after doing a 2-minute super exciting experience, and everyone gives you a
Mhm.
positive feedback, and you
Yeah.
can use this to get a
Mhm.
seat at the table, right? You can use
Yeah.
this to influence your impact on the organization and communicate that design and UX does matter and investing in it. So that knowledge and that practical application is more important than one specific tool. But in
Mhm.
order to be able to do this, you have to
Yeah.
look at what tools are out there, what what is more scientific or less scientific to actually prove a point,
Yeah.
versus are you using this more in manipulating others, or
Mm,
actually finding something out? So it's really an interesting question, but of course, way too much for this. I would
yeah.
just recommend our audience to actually look into some of the work of Mel Slater, Jeremy Bells, and others. John Norman, of course, is still super applicable also in XR. So look at some of those psychologists and their work, and
Mhm.
try to understand it. Don't just get the 5 bullet points
Yeah.
AI version of it, but actually read the books,
Yeah.
or look at the resources and papers.
Yeah, thank you for those powerful recommendations. I hope our audience are taking notes. We have much less time, and just close us off with just one simple thing. How should producers handle consent and privacy in AI powered immersive experiences?
Hmm. Yeah, so privacy. I think that's another huge topic. Of course, we have very little time
Yeah.
for a lot of huge topics.
Mhm.
So I think it is actually a key to success, and that's a little bit overlooked at the moment.
Yeah.
There was a bit of a push towards privacy from Meta, Microsoft a few years back, because they
Mhm.
knew once we want to basically constantly surveil the whole world and every single user with AI using XR, because it's
Mhm.
mandatory to understand the context and the intent of the user. Again, that's very important to make any input for XR context and intent. If we want to understand it, we have to watch the people constantly. So
Yeah.
there was a push to say we're more open, we're more private, but I feel like the last couple of years it's been reverted, and they're kind
Mhm.
of missing the point why it is so important. So I would say double down on the user controlling
Yeah.
privacy, and don't just take it away.
Mhm.
Like an like ask them to opt in and keep as much as you can in
Mhm.
control of the user. Um, it's I think it will be impossible to not use it in some
Mhm.
certain that data, because we need the data in terms of to make a good experience. But keep the control to user, and don't use the psychological tricks to like
Yeah.
or the kind of economy that we're in, sadly, to yeah, to abuse your power as a tech organization.
Mhm.
And for the user, I would say, as a simple rule of thumb, if you're using AI, think about where the content and where the real content creators are, who they are.
Yeah.
If it's a
Yeah.
journalist, if it's a social media person, and give as much money to them as you give to big tech, right? It's that
Mhm.
simple. If you give 20 euros
Wow.
for your subscription, also
Yeah.
gives 20 euros to your journalist, or to your blog,
Mhm.
or your podcast, or whatever. And at least you start a little bit to bring a little bit of balance in
Yeah.
this whole thing.
Yes, Thomas, we could go a distance. I love your charisma. I love the fact that you're sharing from your experience, from your heart. And time was not on our side, but we do have so many GatherVerse summits coming up, and we look forward to having you once again. So that was our fireside for today, and over to you, GatherVerse team. Thank you, Thomas.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.